Hi, my name's Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. I'm a criminal psychologist. This video is a psychological analysis of Beverley Allitt, who murdered 4 children, attempted to murder 3 other children and causing grievous bodily harm to a further 6. I have done a number of psychological analysis videos in the past where I draw on research findings to give an informed opinion of what an offender's behaviour can reveal about their psychology. I am primarily a research psychologist in the area of investigative psychology, which was founded by Professor David Cantor. In all of the videos that I do try to focus more on the psychology of the behaviour rather than aspects of the crime itself. However, it is sometimes necessary to include details. This video contains some details of abuse, mistreatment and murder involving very young children and babies, as well as older adults. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the case and of the offender. Then I'm going to talk about the upbringing and childhood of the offender, as I have sometimes found that this can offer some very valuable insights to their behaviour. Then I'll discuss the behaviours during the crime that reveal psychological aspects of the offender, as well as any psychiatric or mental illnesses that they might have. If you do want to learn more about the psychology of crime and criminal behaviour, I do have a range of online courses available via my website, and there's a link to that in the video description below. Some of the courses are free and some of them are paid, but they do have a money-back guarantee. Because this is such an unusual and complicated case, I'm going to go into more details than I normally would on my videos. I might even split this video into 2 shorter ones. Beverley Allitt is an English serial killer who was born in 1968. As I've said, she murdered 4 children, attempted to murder 3 other children and caused grievous bodily harm to 6. These attacks were carried out over a period of 59 days on a children's ward where she worked as a nurse. Thank you to my friend Stephen Ledsham for suggesting this case for an analysis. Beverley Allitt, as I said, carried out her crimes while she was working on a nurse in a children's ward. She did that by administering large doses of insulin, and at least 2 victims died of that, and another one was found with a large air bubble in their body, but the police weren't able to establish how all of the attacks were carried out. Her victims were children who'd been administered to that hospital for various reasons. The victims were aged between just 7 weeks old and 15 years old. This is one of the more disturbing cases that I've done because she was in a role where she should have been taking care of these children. She was deceptive on many levels and managed to carry on offending for 59 days. She used charm on doctors, nurses and parents so that she was able to carry on killing. In my opinion, there is also a failing on behalf of the hospital. Had appropriate measures been put into place, she could have been stopped earlier. I'll briefly run through who each of the victims were and what happened to them now. The first victim that we know of was just 7 weeks old. On the 21st of February 1991, Liam Taylor was admitted to the ward for possible pneumonia. Allitt reassured his parents that he was in capable hands, and so they went home for the night. When they returned the next morning, they were told that he'd suffered some respiratory problems during the night, but that he'd recovered and was appearing to do quite well. The next night, she was left alone with Liam again, and moments later, Allitt summoned the code team because he'd stopped breathing. Despite the efforts of the team, Liam had suffered severe brain damage and was being maintained on life support. His death was listed as heart failure. 2 weeks later, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, who suffered from cerebral palsy, was admitted after suffering an epileptic seizure. Within a few minutes of being left alone in Allitt's care, his heart stopped. And again, despite the best efforts of the team, they weren't able to revive him. His death was attributed to his epilepsy, even though no obvious cause of death was found. On the 3rd of March 91, 1-year-old Kaylee Desmond was admitted to Ward 4 for a chest infection. She was well on the road to recovery when 5 days later she inexplicably went into cardiac arrest. She was successfully resuscitated and then transferred to another hospital in Nottingham. While she was being examined in the other hospital, the physicians noticed a peculiar puncture mark under her armpit. It appeared to have just been an accidental injection and was never investigated. They later discovered an air bubble in her body. On the 20th of March, a 5-month-old was admitted for bronchitis. Shortly before he was discharged, he was taken care of by Beverley Allitt. He was nearly comatose, and when his body was checked, he was found to have very high levels of insulin. He suffered from the same symptoms 3 more times before he was transferred to another hospital in Nottingham. When he arrived at the hospital, his blood was checked and he was again found to have a high level of insulin. He miraculously survived. The next day, 5-year-old Bradley Gibson was admitted for pneumonia. Later that evening, he went into cardiac arrest and was successfully resuscitated. When his blood levels were checked, he was found to have a high level of insulin. He was cared for again by Allitt and his heart stopped again. After he was resuscitated, he was transferred to another hospital in Nottingham. Later that day, 2-year-old Yikong Chan was admitted after falling from a window and suffering from a skull fracture. While he was being cared for by Allitt, his oxygen levels dropped dangerously low on 2 occasions. He was transferred to a larger hospital in Nottingham and his symptoms were just attributed to his head injury. About 1.5 weeks later, on April the 1st, 2-month-old Becky Phillips was admitted for a stomach virus. While she was being cared for by Allitt, she began exhibiting symptoms of hypoglycemia. She was examined, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with her, and so she was sent home. During the night, she went into convulsions, and when her parents contacted a doctor, they were told that she probably had colic. She died later that night. As a precaution, her twin sister, Katie Phillips, was admitted to the same ward. Not long after being cared for by Allitt, she stopped breathing and had to be resuscitated. 2 days later, she stopped breathing again, but this time she suffered permanent brain damage due to the prolonged lack of oxygen. When she was transferred to another hospital, it was later found that she had large doses of insulin and potassium in her blood. Katie's mum was so grateful to Allitt for saving her child that she asked her to be the child's godmother. Beverley Allitt graciously accepted. 4 more helpless victims fell prey to Beverley Allitt's attacks, but it was the death of 50-month-old Claire Peck that had bring her murderous spree to an end. On April the 22nd, baby Claire was admitted to Ward 4 following a very serious asthma attack that required her to be put on a ventilator. After being left alone with Allitt, she suffered a cardiac arrest and had to be resuscitated. She was stabilised and then left alone with Allitt again. And shortly after that, she suffered another heart attack, and this time the doctors weren't able to save her. When an autopsy was performed, it was discovered that she had traces of lidocaine in her system, and that's a drug that was given to cardiac arrest patients, but never given to a baby. When the police were finally notified, they examined the records of 25 suspicious cases. In most instances, victims had either had high levels of insulin, potassium, or both in their system. And the only common factor linking all of the cases together was Beverley Allitt. In May 1993, at Nottingham Crown Court, she received 13 life sentences for the crimes. The judge recommended that she serve a minimum term of 40 years. However, she later appealed this and it was reduced to 30 years. This means that she would have been eligible for parole in 2022. However, she would only be released if she was considered to be no longer a danger to the public. The defence team employed an expert, Professor Roy Meadows, and he reported that she was suffering characteristics of Munchausen's by proxy disorder. Munchausen's by proxy involves inflicting injury on others to gain attention for oneself. She was also engaged in self-harming behaviours within the prison since their conviction. Because of this, she was deemed to be putting her life and that of the other inmates at risk. As a result, the then Home Secretary gave a direction under Section 27 of the Mental Health Act for Beverley Allitt to be moved from HMP Holloway to Grantham Secure Hospital. Importantly, the Home Secretary further stipulated that subject to these special restrictions set out in Section 49, there'd be no limit on the detention time for her offences. She is currently being held at the top security Rampton Hospital in Nottinghamshire. Allitt initially denied the crimes and pleaded not guilty. However, she's later confessed to them in an attempt to stay in the secure hospital rather than being moved to the general prison population. Now, as I said earlier, I wouldn't normally include such a large amount of details in a psychological analysis. However, in this particular case, I feel that it would help you to understand how she was able to harm and kill so many patients under her care before suspicion had been arisen. She was dubbed by the media as the Angel of Death, and that's probably a reference to Keller and Keller's categorisation of female serial killers. They give a classification system that enables female serial killers to be defined according to their motive. There are 7 categories that exist, and Angel of Death is one of them. These women kill physically vulnerable people who are involuntarily under their care, for example, in a hospital or a nursing home or as a parent. According to Keller and Keller, her motives are a need to control others and a need for recognition. The woman might have an undiagnosed psychological disorder such as Munchausen by proxy. I think then I'll leave this video here, and in the next video I'll talk about her upbringing, the psychology of behaviour and her mental health conditions. I'll release part 2 tomorrow though, so you're not waiting too long, and I will add a link to that in the description box to this video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.